Some breaking news right now. Disgraced financier Jeffrey Epstein has taken his own life while he was behind bars here in New York City. Epstein was facing trafficking charges and
it reinforced the research that I did on my book that Jeffrey Epstein has always viewed himself as smarter than everybody else, and he also has collected people all along the way, particularly over the 2 decades through his trafficking. And that was always to get secrets and bits of information about individuals that he could pass to other people. He trafficked in.
Doesn't it? She probably wants to get out early. So I think that we have more digging to do. I think the DOJ transparency effort here is the right thing. But the reason it's on a Friday, Will, is I think there are no smoking guns. There's other places we have to look.
Well, Buck,
what if one of America's most polished, family-friendly stars wasn't just brushing up against Jeffrey Epstein's world, but moving through the same elite circles that allegedly kept powerful figures insulated for years? That's the uncomfortable question hanging over Steve Harvey right now. Fresh drops from the Epstein files hit Washington in November 2025.
Took my Winton from me. He turned my son against me.
And suddenly, the timelines, friendships, and repeated overlaps are starting to look way too familiar for coincidence. We're not talking about a stray name buried in some random email. We're talking about a pattern, a network where Epstein's correspondence, Diddy's controversial legal battles, and the quiet turbulence inside Harvey's own household.
So I just keep going through. But then I'll tell you something too. Haters motivate me. Because when they talking about me, that means I'm doing it.
All seem to sit in the same era, around the same groups, wrapped in the same uneasy silence. And that silence is what has people speculating harder than ever. In mid-November 2025, lawmakers released more than 20,000 pages from the so-called Epstein files, a massive set of documents covering emails and messages from 2008 through 2019. These pages included notes where Epstein allegedly bragged that Donald Trump knew about the girls and referenced spending long hours at his properties.
Now, I'm a Christian, but I ain't that good a Christian.
With witnesses like household staff reportedly confirming how aware he was of the environment around him. While these revelations hit the public, Democrats and Republicans instantly turned the whole thing into a political tug-of-war. Each side accused the other of cherry-picking what to release, shaping the narrative, and using selective leaks to protect their own favorites. On the surface, it looked like just another partisan battle. But underneath, it showed something far more important for our story. It proved these files are not some rumor mill sideshow. They are now part of official public record, pulling more names, more connections, and more questionable relationships into the spotlight. And when those names start intersecting with people who never expected to be dragged into this conversation, everything gets messy, fast. Now layer all of that onto what happened with Sean Diddy Combs in 2024. After years of whispers, lawsuits, and online speculation, federal prosecutors finally brought a sweeping case against him, a case built on testimony from ex-partners and insiders who described,
"Hell hath no fury like a woman scorned." Well, Steve's learning that the hard way tonight. Steve's ex-wife, Mary Harvey, is angry, and she's going public.
What they called unusual freak-off gatherings dating back to around 2008. By mid-2025, a New York jury had cleared him on the most severe accusations like racketeering, conspiracy, and using force. But the cultural damage was already done. The public had heard too many stories, too many timelines, too many overlaps. And here's where things start getting uncomfortable for Steve Harvey. Because the years mentioned in the Epstein files, the years tied to Diddy's controversies, and the years connected to the quiet storms inside Harvey's own marriage, all sit in the exact same window. That overlap is why the internet refuses to move on from the speculation. But even after being cleared on the heaviest accusations, the jury still found him guilty on 2 counts of transporting people across state and international lines for paid intimate encounters. And those counts carry up to 10 years each.
Wrong, they're suddenly going to be in the spotlight. And that's just a kind of a strange scenario that we're finding ourselves in. As to why they released it, I mean, look, the grand jury materials, I think, were kind of properly protected by a judge who said, no, it's not enough just that the world's really excited and wants to know kind of scurrilous details about Epstein and Maxwell. The judge, I think, properly respected the statutory protections.
He's currently serving a 50-month sentence in a federal facility in New Jersey, with a newly updated projected release date of June 2028 after a recent status adjustment behind bars. His legal team says they're preparing an appeal, and he continues to deny any wrongdoing. But the testimony about long, choreographed encounters, reportedly filmed and used as leverage, has already shattered the wholesome mogul persona he once promoted. That shiny public image is gone, no matter how the legal process plays out. And this is exactly where Steve Harvey slides into the storyline. While Epstein was firing off strange, arrogant emails about presidents and power brokers, and while Diddy was allegedly running a hidden operation to manage his private habits, Harvey was busy transforming into daytime television's unofficial moral referee. He was the guy telling callers to raise their standards, telling men to step up, and telling women to stop tolerating disrespect.
Oh, he's a man with the power. He's in 60 markets. He's written these books. He's socially connected with the programs and Disney and all these type people.
But behind that polished wisdom coach exterior, his own ex-wife Mary was accusing him in filings and online videos of emotional torment, financial manipulation, and what she dramatically described as soul destruction. It was a phrase she used to describe a mix of alleged deprivation, psychological pressure, and what she claimed felt like an attempt to break her spirit. All allegations Harvey denied. Back in 2017, Mary filed a $60 million lawsuit accusing him of everything from conspiracy against rights to emotional torment. The case was eventually dismissed on jurisdictional grounds. The judge said it belonged in Texas, and Harvey's team labeled it frivolous and completely false. But even though the case disappeared from the courtroom, the allegations themselves never truly vanished. They just stopped being discussed on camera, tucked away behind the cheerful talk show lighting. And by 2019, all these threads were moving at the exact same time. Epstein was still alive, still emailing journalists and associates, still acting untouchable inside his powerful network. Diddy was still dominating music, nightlife, and branding, running exclusive events with carefully controlled guest lists. And Harvey? He was rising higher than ever on daytime TV.
And my wish to you is success in millions and billions.
Becoming a household name while quietly distancing himself from the shadows swirling around him. By that point, Steve Harvey's own household was turning into a tabloid magnet because of his stepdaughter Lori. That summer, Lori Harvey, then a young adult, was photographed again and again with Diddy, who was in his late 40s, traveling through Cabo, strolling through New York in matching outfits, and even sitting at a quiet lunch in Italy with Lori's mother and Steve right there at the table. Then came the photos from August, the ones showing Lori with her arm around Diddy during a family meal. Those images instantly turned what had been a rumor into a full-blown public conversation. Comment sections exploded with people asking why a man who built his career as America's dad seemed comfortable with his stepdaughter being linked to someone nearly 3 decades older, especially someone surrounded by long-running whispers about controlling behavior and unusual private gatherings. Back then, the media treated it like harmless celebrity chatter. TMZ-style outlets framed it as a casual summer romance. People close to Diddy insisted he was still healing after Kim Porter's sudden passing in late 2018. And insiders claimed Lori had always been a longtime family friend who brought him some comfort during a tough season. The tone was soft, almost protective. Some reports even stressed that Lori had always denied dating Diddy's son Justin, despite years of fan speculation that she had been connected to him first. But now, in late 2025, that entire 2019 storyline looks completely different when we line it up with what jurors later heard in federal court. We now know that during that exact period, Diddy's alleged pattern of flying partners and hired participants to different cities for long, tightly managed encounters was already well established. Behind closed doors, witnesses described detailed schedules, recordings reportedly used as pressure, and a trusted circle of staff who kept the whole operation silent and organized. And suddenly, those cozy pictures from Italy and Mexico don't look like lighthearted vacation snapshots anymore. They look like images sitting on the outer edge of a far more complicated orbit, one that now feels unsettling when viewed through everything we've learned in the years since. The same scenes that once seemed glamorous now come with a shadow of possibility and unanswered questions about who knew what and when. Meanwhile, the Epstein emails released this year add a whole new layer of context about how the ultra-wealthy seem to think about risk. Many of Epstein's messages, often typed in all lowercase with strange punctuation and sloppy errors, painted a picture of a man so confident in his protection that he didn't even bother fixing obvious mistakes while discussing presidents, accusers, and sensitive situations. In one email from early 2019, he wrote that Trump knew about the girls, referencing staff testimony about how often the future president was around. A statement typed so casually it barely looked like he paused to think about the weight of those words. In another message, he was strategizing with writer Michael Wolff about how to spin Trump's public comments into leverage or currency. The tone throughout the emails is casual, dismissive, almost bored, like he believed nothing he typed could ever touch him. It reads like the voice of someone fully convinced that no message, no conversation, no reckless detail could ever cost him his status or comfort. That mindset matters because it raises a bigger question. Was a similar culture of protection operating around other high-profile men, including Diddy and Steve Harvey? When Lori Harvey was photographed with Diddy, then seen again with her parents during that Europe trip, fans immediately turned to Steve Harvey's public feeds expecting some kind of response. Instead, what they got was silence. A silence so loud it became its own talking point. At the exact moment Lori and Diddy were trending everywhere, Steve was busy promoting his Sand and Soul Festival in Cancun and sharing posts about his anniversary trips with Marjorie. Commenters were flooding his pages asking, "Where is Uncle Steve?" and openly wondering how a man who built an empire on relationship advice could say absolutely nothing while his stepdaughter was rumored to be linked to someone nearly her father's age. Someone already surrounded by long-running whispers of extravagant late-night environments and intense private gatherings. Fans expected the moral referee to step in, especially from a man who wrote a best-selling book on relationships, but instead they saw a wall of silence that didn't match the public persona he had spent years building. And that silence became part of the story. A story that feels even more complicated now that all these timelines and conversations overlap in ways the public can't ignore anymore. We can't ignore the weight of that silence, especially coming from someone whose private life had already been dragged through courts, blogs, and years of messy online fallout. Mary Harvey had gone on camera claiming that the division of assets from their Texas divorce never matched what the judge promised, saying she had been left financially and emotionally drained. She also claimed Steve used his influence to push her to the margins while he rebuilt his image as a polished self-help expert. Steve's attorneys came out swinging, promising to vigorously defend and counterclaim. And over time, judges dismissed her major case, something his team celebrated loudly. But the allegations themselves never fully disappeared. And now those accusations about emotional pressure, manipulation, and psychological strain sit uncomfortably beside the picture of a stepfather who reportedly watched Lori sit across from Diddy during that lunch and chose to keep every reaction fully hidden behind closed doors. People who understand Hollywood's protection playbook say this type of silence is rarely accidental. They claim it's usually a calculated strategy agreed on by managers, lawyers, and network executives, a coordinated shield to prevent a scandal from growing legs. The logic behind that strategy is blunt. If Steve publicly acknowledged concern about Diddy, it would immediately spark follow-up questions about what he had witnessed behind the scenes at events, private gatherings, or industry celebrations going back years. And that's the uncomfortable part, because Harvey and Diddy have moved in overlapping circles since the mid-2000s. They were photographed at the same award shows, the same high-profile dinners, the same celebrity-packed parties. So if Harvey had publicly disapproved in 2019, reporters could have asked whether he was only bothered because paparazzi caught it on camera, or whether he had ignored whispers that insiders claim were circulating long before any photos hit the blogs. Now, as Congress pushes the Department of Justice to release every remaining Epstein-related document under a proposed Transparency Act, and while Diddy sits inside FCI Fort Dix with more than 70 civil suits still hanging over his businesses and personal wealth, Steve Harvey's old decisions are being re-examined with fresh eyes. Suddenly, his silence doesn't look neutral. It looks strategic, it looks calculated, and it raises questions that fans never thought they'd be asking about the man who once branded himself as America's moral voice. On one side, you have the talk show star who spent years telling women to know their worth and telling men to step up with integrity. On the other side, you have an ex-wife who says she was emotionally wrecked, a stepdaughter who entered a rumored relationship with a man, later convicted for serious misconduct involving paid encounters and coercive dynamics, and a long, unbroken stretch of strategic silence from a man who usually comments on everything under the sun. What keeps appearing across all these stories is a pattern, not just of individual actions, but of entire networks built on quiet protection. Epstein casually wrote about using sensitive information as leverage. Diddy's accusers described recordings and financial pressure that reportedly kept people close and compliant. And Steve Harvey, based on filings and interviews, was portrayed by critics as someone determined to control the narrative around his divorces and present himself as a wiser, redeemed figure moving past the chaos. When we place all of that next to the 2019 images of Lori and Diddy sharing family meals, and then compare it to the 2025 reality of new Epstein emails and a once untouchable mogul sitting inside a federal facility, the main question starts to shift dramatically. It's no longer about whether Steve Harvey just happened to brush up against these controversial worlds by accident. It becomes a question of how far into that protective ecosystem he traveled, how much he understood about the men seated at his table, and how many decisions were quietly coordinated behind closed doors to make sure the public never saw the entire picture. For years, the narrative told to viewers was simple. Steve Harvey's world existed on a completely different shelf from the nightmare names tied to Jeffrey Epstein and Sean Diddy Combs. It was presented as if daytime talk shows, self-help books, and inspirational speeches existed in a clean bubble, untouched by the darker conversations happening in private rooms in elite circles. But now, those clean lines don't look so clean anymore. They look blurred, overlapping, and uncomfortable, especially when the timelines, relationships, and silences start lining up in ways the public can no longer ignore. For years, family game nights and motivational tours were sold as if they lived in a completely different universe from leaked emails, federal charges, and sealed affidavits. But when you line up the paperwork, the lawsuits, the emails, the timelines, that illusion starts to crack hard. The dismissal of Mary Harvey's $60 million lawsuit in 2017 was never a judge declaring Steve innocent or wrongfully accused. It was a Los Angeles judge saying the case didn't belong in California because the divorce had been finalized in Texas back in 2005. A procedural punt, not a moral ruling. Meanwhile, the accusations Mary made, claims of soul destruction, deprivation, and psychological torment, simply stayed floating in the air, unresolved and uncomfortable even as Steve reinvented himself publicly as a trusted self-help figure. Around that same period, Epstein's emails spanning 2008 to 2019 showed a man typing casually that Trump knew about the girls, referencing House staff testimony and speaking about leverage like it was just another business tool. The tone wasn't panicked. It wasn't defensive. It was disturbingly normal, like discussing highly sensitive information was just another Tuesday for him. And in that same timeline, Diddy was quietly building the pattern that would lead to his 2025 conviction and that 50-month sentence inside a New Jersey federal facility. Prosecutors described a system involving travel, recruiting, and tightly controlled private encounters stretching back more than a decade, a system that reportedly ran with precision behind closed doors. This is where the real story starts to come into focus. Not in one paparazzi photo, not in a viral clip, but in the system of documents that map out who was protected, who stayed quiet, and who kept moving forward untouched. On one side, you have Epstein's more than 20,000 pages of correspondence released in November 2025. Pages filled with typos, lowercase rambling, and bizarre punctuation that still managed to outline a clear model of influence, leverage, and pressure. On another side, you have a Los Angeles court wiping Mary Harvey's case off the docket strictly because of jurisdiction, not because her claims were evaluated or disproven. Even as she stood on YouTube saying a judge had promised a fair division of assets that never arrived, and expressing her feeling that Steve should face accountability for what she called years of emotional destruction. Those statements, whether exaggerated or not, sat in the public space with no official resolution, just lingering tension and unanswered questions. And hovering above all of this is the shared timeline. The years where Epstein typed recklessly, Diddy operated freely, and Steve Harvey rebuilt his brand with spotless polish while keeping the deepest cracks of his personal world far from the spotlight. When all three timelines overlap, the narrative stops being about isolated events and starts looking like a system built on silence and selective protection. All of this sits directly inside Diddy's long timeline. The civil suits, the whispered settlements, and eventually the federal jury that cleared him of the most explosive accusations, but still found him guilty of transporting people across borders for paid encounters. That alone was enough for the Bureau of Prisons to revise his projected release date to June 2028, after internal discipline tied to what officials described as repeated substance-related rule violations. And when we zoom out, a bigger pattern starts to form. Something media lawyers often call structured silence. Steve Harvey's empire, which multiple business outlets estimated at around $200 million in the late 2000s, didn't grow out of nowhere. It expanded during a period when serious accusations around him were either deflected, delayed, or quietly dismissed in ways that kept the public narrative clean. His empire grew while Mary's claims were pushed out of California and rerouted to Texas, only to disappear inside a maze of filings that never reached a full public trial. It grew while PR teams at major networks polished his image into something spotless, landing him a lucrative 2017 book deal and a high-profile move to Fox, even as court documents from that same year listed terms like deprivation, conspiracy against rights, and coercive behavior in connection with his name. All allegations he firmly denied, and we're not talking about some random gossip rumor. These were filings obtained by mainstream outlets paired with statements from Harvey's own attorney calling Mary's case meritless and promising they would vigorously defend and counterclaim. The paperwork was real. The accusations were real, even if the court never examined them in a full trial setting. Structured silence shows up again when we look at how Diddy's current prison situation has been presented to the public. Official reports from inside FCI Fort Dix point to sanctions for substance-related rule violations, painting his delayed privileges as a simple case of a celebrity inmate struggling to adjust to life behind razor wire. On the surface, it reads like a typical discipline issue, nothing more. But insiders familiar with federal facilities say those violations can also act as a convenient catch-all when authorities are dealing with a high-profile inmate whose presence triggers extra security concerns. It's a way to keep things quiet, keep paperwork tidy, and avoid drawing attention to anything that could attract headlines. And when you place that structured silence next to the quiet that surrounded Steve Harvey's household, his ex-wife's accusations, and his stepdaughter's public moments with Diddy, the overlap becomes harder to ignore. It starts looking less like coincidence and more like a system working exactly as designed. A former federal corrections consultant once explained that a high-profile inmate with deep ties to executives, politicians, and decades of private gatherings is never treated like just another number on a roster. He's a walking archive. And when that same inmate has more than 70 civil suits still pending against him, some alleging coercive encounters reportedly recorded on video, the stakes of every sanction, every hearing, every early release review climb dramatically higher. Then we go back to Epstein's emails and see the same mindset, but written in a far cruder, almost reckless form. In one 2019 message, he typed that Trump knew about the young women, pointed out that a former Mar-a-Lago employee once worked for him, referenced staff testimony, and suggested he could be the one capable of damaging Trump's reputation. He even offered to send a reporter images of Trump with young women in bikinis inside Epstein's kitchen, a batch of files that the journalist later said never arrived. We also see him chatting with writer Michael Wolff about using sensitive knowledge as leverage. All of it written in sloppy lowercase with strange punctuation marks, like the consequences simply did not exist for him. It's the voice of someone convinced the system will always bend in his direction, no matter how reckless he becomes. So where does Steve Harvey fit into this picture? This is where we have to explore something industry veterans quietly describe as a protection racket for reputations. Epstein's circle included people who didn't directly participate in his worst behaviors, but allegedly helped by staying silent, managing introductions, or smoothing over problems when tensions rose. In Diddy's world, according to former staffers who later filed lawsuits, the structure reportedly relied on managers, security workers, and aides who arranged travel, prepared private locations, and handled payouts or non-disclosure agreements when situations escalated. It was a system built to keep operations controlled and questions minimized. And during those same years, Steve Harvey wasn't just telling jokes on stage. He was signing massive long-term deals that positioned him as the face of family values. He was building a clean, inspirational empire while his ex-wife was on camera saying he owed her tens of millions and that her life had been emotionally ruined by the fallout of their marriage. Harvey's team denied every accusation, but the contrast between his polished public image and her raw claims created a split screen that fans had no explanation for. This is where the pattern becomes impossible to ignore. Epstein relying on quiet cooperation, Diddy reportedly operating with layers of staff and secrecy, and Steve Harvey rising to the highest levels of mainstream media while accusations around him were redirected, delayed, or dismissed out of public view. The overlaps aren't identical, but the protective structure looks eerily familiar. Look closely at 2017, because that year sits at the center of this entire pattern. Mary Harvey's lawsuit hit headlines with explosive accusations, including the phrase soul destruction, which she defined in her filing as a mix of deprivation and intense emotional breaking. But instead of going to trial, the case was pushed aside on a jurisdiction technicality, never tested in open court, never put through a full examination. At that exact same moment, Steve Harvey was signing a major agreement with a powerhouse publisher to grow his relationship advice empire, capitalizing on the success of his earlier books and media appearances. He was also restructuring his talk show deal, moving into a new partnership that eventually placed Steve onto a different network with an even bigger platform. Corporate America was fully investing in him, betting on a safe, fatherly figure who could sell books, ad slots, and festival tickets with a smile. And that forces the question, did these companies simply look away from the filings, or did they decide that as long as the judge didn't advance the case, the accusations didn't matter? When a machine is generating millions, and in some cases billions, there are people with real incentives to keep the engine running smoothly. We also can't ignore how skillfully Harvey has managed his public brand whenever storms hit. When the Miss Universe fiasco exploded in 2015 and he read the wrong name on live television, he turned a global embarrassment into a long-running joke and somehow used it to book even more high-profile gigs. When internal reports suggested ratings were slipping on one network, he pivoted to another platform and expanded his festival, radio, and online presence with almost surgical timing. That's not just charisma, that's strategy, discipline, and a team that knows exactly how to spin chaos into momentum. And if someone can absorb that many very public hits and still climb higher, imagine how carefully they would respond if questions tied to Epstein's email leaks or Diddy's conviction ever drifted too close to their front door. Every silence, every no comment, every choice to focus on travel vlogs and motivational clips instead of addressing hard questions becomes another piece of a pattern built on selective visibility and strategic quiet. And in a year like 2017, when lawsuits, book deals, network negotiations, and high-stakes branding collided all at once, that pattern becomes almost impossible to ignore. So here we are in late 2025, Epstein's bizarre lowercase emails being dissected in Washington, Diddy counting down time inside FCI Fort Dix, and Mary Harvey's old accusations suddenly going viral again across social media. One thing is crystal clear. Steve Harvey's situation is no longer just the story of a smiling host whose name accidentally brushed against darker headlines. We're looking at a man whose fortune, estimated in the hundreds of millions, rose during the very same years the system was quietly teaching him how real power operates. Steve Harvey didn't end up near Epstein's orbit by pure accident. He didn't stay silent about Diddy by coincidence. And he didn't build a polished empire on family values while his ex-wife publicly described emotional destruction simply because the system failed him. He built that fortune because the system worked exactly as designed for people who move carefully within it. And now the question shifts dramatically. It's no longer about whether Steve Harvey understood what was happening behind those closed doors. The real question becomes, who is still running interference for him today? What do they gain from protecting him? And how many more secrets are waiting to surface when the next batch of files drops? When these names overlap, Epstein, Diddy, Harvey, the connections stop looking like random coincidences and start looking like a structure. A structure built on selective silence, strategic timing, and reputations protected behind layered walls of PR, legal maneuvering, and quiet cooperation. So what do you think really ties these timelines and relationships together? And when the truth finally hits daylight, whose story will you believe? The polished version or the one buried beneath years of carefully managed quiet? Until then, we're watching every move, every headline, every filing, every shift in the narrative. Stay sharp, stay curious, hit like, subscribe, share, and drop a comment, and we'll see you on the next one.